So speaking of different opinions, it's time to get some more of them. So we've got our panel discussion now, and I've got some wonderful people lined up. So let's say hello to them all. Hello. Welcome to you all from around the globe, actually. And in a minute, I'm going to ask you all to say hi and tell us a bit about yourselves. A quick reminder first to the audience, just to post any questions you've got for the panel, and we'll try to get to them. Our theme for the session is about how to foster collaboration in your team and beyond. Okay, so joining us, we have Jordan, Chetana, and Chelsea. Jordan's a writer, activist, and experienced marketing consultant who's currently leading the product content design team at Twitter. Hi, Jordan. Can you just give us a little quick potted history of your time in content?
Yeah, sure. Hello, everyone. My name is Jordan Craig. My pronouns are she, her. My accessibility intro, I'm an African-American woman wearing tortoiseshell glasses. I've been at Twitter for about the last 2 years leading content design, but before Twitter, I worked for several nonprofit marketing agencies where we focused on UX writing. My team did a lot of taxonomy, information architecture, and things of that nature. So that really led me into content design. And I've been, like I said, I've been at Twitter for the last 2 years. So.
Awesome, thank you. Next up, we have Chetana, a design leader and mentor who until very recently was design director at Coursera. Chetana's kindly joining us from very late in the evening where she is. So hi, Chetana. Again, can you introduce yourself and just tell us a bit about you?
Sure. Hi, and good evening, good afternoon, good morning. So I'm Chetana, been around in the Silicon Valley for close to 21 years. Most recently led product design for Coursera. And as I was sharing with these wonderful ladies in our warm-up conversation, I've been fortunate to lead design to help audiences out there binge read when I was at Scribd, maybe binge watch when I was at Netflix, and then binge learn with Coursera. So it's been an absolutely fantastic journey, and it's been an honor to be able to work with some of the most amazing content design leaders and be an advocate for this discipline. So I'm hoping to share that here with you.
Oh, that's nice to hear. Thank you. And last but not least, we have Chelsea, who some of you might have seen talk at Button last year. Chelsea's also design director, and she's currently at Zendesk. Thank you for joining us, Chelsea. Again, can you just give us a bit of background to your path to design leadership?
Sure, yes. Hi, everyone. I'm Chelsea Larson. My pronouns are she, her, and my accessibility intro is I'm a Caucasian woman wearing brown glasses. And I am a product design director now, as well as a content design director at Zendesk. I lead the global practice of content design and then work across an org of 100 product designers to help build strong partnerships between content design, engineering, product, and design.
Wow. Big team.
Yeah.
Thank you. Great. So, yeah, let's just jump straight into our discussion. And I want to kick off with a question for all of you, actually. And what I'd like to know is, how do you know when a team is collaborating well? What are the kind of characteristics or success markers? And I'll start with you on this one, Jordan.
I love this question because collaboration is obviously so key for your team to be working successfully. So some characteristics for my team: high trust, if they're working efficiently, giving each other grace when something goes wrong and not necessarily assuming negative intent. Just making sure that everyone is communicating pretty openly and fluidly. So those are my characteristics.
Okay. Chelsea, how about you?
I was going to say laughing. So if there's a level of comfort where the team can actually have humor, like Jordan said, and give each other grace, that means that there's low animosity, that there's high trust, that there's high vulnerability. And all of those things are foundational to collaboration. So humor is a good indicator of a healthy collaborative team.
Would you agree with that, Chetana?
Absolutely going to be adding to both of the characteristic shout-outs here. The two that come to my mind that I have experienced on teams when they were not collaborative to them becoming collaborative is, one, the ability to take high risk and then be able to reap the rewards accordingly, because to Jordan's point, the trust was there. And another one is willing to take accountability, willing to step up, step in, not be shy, not be afraid. And inadvertently, highly collaborative teams would land up providing individual career growth. That, of course, took longer for me to assess, but it was inevitable that if the individual's career growth was possible, it's because they were really learning how to work together.
And that kind of mention of assessment, that kind of, I guess, leads me on to ask, you sort of mentioned assessing, health issues. How do you diagnose those team health issues that might be particular to collaboration? Any sort of tried and tested techniques, or is it just listening, or scouting around to like sniff out the pain points? So what have you all tried around that? Chelsea, you've got a really big team, I guess, like with a team that size, it must be tricky to sort of almost like sniff out those issues.
Yeah, so is the question, how does one identify the issues?
Yeah, how do you sort of diagnose where that isn't working very well?
Yeah, I mean, it's the opposite of what we've all just spoken about. So instead of open communication, it's competitive, back channeling, using othering language, like they always do this, that department, using non-inclusive language when you're talking about your team, circular conversations where nobody seems to feel empowered to make a decision. That's a huge one for me. If I'm in a room of folks, at all levels, even C-suite, and the conversation just keeps going, well, I think this. If you have a lot of I thinks instead of what do you think, that's a pretty big red flag that people aren't listening. So yeah, all of those little flags add up, and then it takes somebody who feels empowered enough to just say, hey, I don't think we're all hearing each other. Can we just all step back and revisit the goal that we all set forward today and see if we can try again to get closer to that goal?
Yeah, Jordan, you're nodding
I have
along and
something
smiling
to
to that.
add,
Yeah, please add it.
To add to Chelsea's point, I think as writers, at least on my team, we're all inherently slightly paranoid. So when I notice there's like an uptick in paranoia, I'm like, ooh, we need to get back to having open dialogue to see where the issues might be. So I just wanted to add just a wee bit of paranoia if we start to see that creep in.
How do you sniff that out? I mean, and Chetana, like obviously you're kind of working across disciplines as well. You're kind of working across research, product design, content design. Like, how do you sort of, I guess, sniff out where those issues are coming from, or where that kind of paranoia might be coming from?
I think transparency is one area that comes to mind. As Chelsea was sharing, it easily flips into competitiveness, but a highly collaborative team will be excited to present at all hands or share progress or want to be able to be transparent with what's going on. The other very obvious one is just productivity. We should be able to see progress and stuff happening and no finger pointing and blaming. With content designers on a collaborative team, it's a very challenging role because you typically tend to work on many projects. In that situation, the transparency and the excitement really speaks to their engagement on the project.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. And I think I guess with like product design and content design particularly, I don't think I've worked in many companies where at some point there hasn't been some sort of collaboration issues between those two disciplines. What do you think like the biggest barriers are to particularly for those roles, to sort of effective collaboration within those design teams?
Actually, one more thing I might add that is a bit of a response to the previous question and this question. It is also the optimism and confidence to want to educate and evangelize what it is I do, or what it is that a product designer does or a content designer does. The willingness for cross-functional members to want to hear and be curious, and the confidence and trust for the one who's sharing to share. So internal education and evangelizing is grossly underestimated. We always onboard new employees to a company, but we rarely spend time onboarding a product manager to a content designer, or a product designer to a brand marketing writer. So I think that's an area that really could help with reducing the barriers. And one that really I have lived for a long time is the confusion between writing for marketing and UX writing. And with that, I will leave it over to the experts with Jordan and Chelsea. That's an area I have to really advocate for, that I'm not asking for hiring more copywriters. I am negotiating for a headcount for a UX writer. And then, of course, I have to go down the entire, what is the difference? What does one do? What does the other do?
It's fascinating, isn't it? Because I guess like for people like, I mean, Jordan, you've worked in marketing before, like as I have as well. And it's like, we kind of get that it's a very different skill. And we kind of get that it's a very different discipline. But how do we explain that? I mean, Jordan, how do you you know, if you're kind of advocating or evangelizing for content design, how with product managers or product designers, how do you sort of explain the difference?
Well, one of the ways that we explain the difference, we try to do a roadshow and catch everybody as early on in the onboarding experience as we possibly can, so that people do have a good idea that we're really working on all of the UI copy, and marketing and brand are working on like top of the funnel copy. So when they're speaking externally, because I think the place that we actually run into the biggest issue is when we're talking about our features. So the brand team works on the way we would speak about it externally, and then my team works on the way we would speak about it internally or within the product itself. So typically we try to catch the PMs or even designers that might not have actually worked with content design before as early on in the process. And then we've established a few different things like our working norms, which we'll totally get into in a little bit, but that has helped clarify our role and when to bring us into the process and how to effectively communicate with us. Because I think that's probably the biggest barrier that my team suffers from in collaboration, is just pure communication. Because some of it is people are unintentionally leaving us out of the room because they don't know we exist. And then some of it is people are just intentionally leaving us out of the room. And so that's really where the collaboration barriers come in for us.
And I guess they're the trickier ones to crack, the ones that are intentionally leaving you out of the room.
For sure.
Is that a problem you find at Zendesk, Chelsea?
Certainly in the beginning of starting the practice 3 years ago, there were folks who unintentionally and intentionally felt that they didn't need content design, which makes sense because they were getting along without it, you know, and I was asking them to introduce an entirely new practice in org into their workflow. And I needed to do that by showing value, right? Which is what we've done. But now the barriers of collaboration, I try to look at them in 3 categories, which I got these from Carrie, who leads content design at LinkedIn, but it's like process, product, process, product, and people. And is it a process issue? You know, is it something in the workflow that just folks just don't know where to insert you, you know, in their process? That's really easy to fix. Is it a product problem? Is it something that's like, because of tech constraints or eng resourcing, we don't even have, or that team doesn't have the opportunity to include content design at this time. You know, there's just, they're not going to be able to do that work, you know, then it's fine. You know, it makes sense for us not to be involved. But if it's a people problem, and those are where the tricky ones are, then we have to dig down into like, is this intentional? Is this unintentional? Is this because you just came from a company that has never had UX writers and I need to school you now? Or is it just, you know, that you need to be introduced to the team? So yeah, I try to look at it in those different categories so I can really strategically apply a solution.
And I guess I'm keen to know whose role it is to kind of foster that collaboration, because as team leaders, we always think that it's our job to kind of solve all these issues ourselves. But I'm keen to understand what role you think product managers play in fostering collaboration within their product teams, because often it's it is within teams rather than within the broader team as such. So how do you think product managers can help there?
I have a million thoughts on this. I really believe that a good product manager is the bridge to all the disciplines and the putty that holds everything together and is the captain of the ship. Like every metaphor you want to throw at the product manager, they have so much power to bring us together. And if they don't do that, what ends up happening is that everyone works in their little discipline silos, and at the end we try to put something together. But if a product manager can make everyone on their team kind of a little PM and unite everybody and connect the dots for them, that team's going to be so much more effective, so much more efficient. And that PM is the person who's across all of this. So they really have the power and visibility to bring us together. We should all do it ourselves as leaders, but they truly are in the seat of power, I feel like.
Chetana, you're nodding along, agreeing with that one.
110%. It's like the strongest collaborations I've seen in my entire career is even in my role to be able to work in my one-on-ones or in roadmap planning meetings, beginning of the year, beginning of the quarter, with the various PMs in the team, because there's also a separate talk that can happen about the PM to design ratio and then the design to content design ratio. But to Chelsea's point, the product manager also considers themselves to be the owner. Well, you own the entirety of it. You own the success, you own the morale, the motivation, the individuals' happiness, the collective team's alignment. And so outside of just, of course, defining the business objective, enabling collaboration, doing certain amount of project management, which does fall on many product managers, I think that when it comes to content design, just being open to learning what they don't know is a huge opening. I think we discussed in a previous topic about when it's intentionally being kept away, and then the product managers in the role of being the owner, we can spend so many cycles on the wrong problem. The product managers who are willing to understand what is marketing copy, what is UX writing, how does it impact the ROI from a PM's point of view, that is such a magical empowerment, both for product design and content design.
Yeah, I agree. I guess the most effective cross-functional teams, not cross-functional teams, the most effective multidiscipline teams I've worked in, where the collaboration there is almost driven by the product manager. They're getting the whole team to determine what the product roadmap looks like, what their kind of North Star vision is for the product. They're getting them to do that together, and they're kind of fostering that trust and that collaboration from the outset, even before they start designing together. And that's just like so valuable. So how do you, Jordan, I guess, kind of build relationships with those product managers, particularly if you're managing a large team, there's probably quite a lot of product managers that you've got to get on side in terms of understanding what content design is and how content designers work and how the design process should work. So how do you kind of go about fostering those relations?
The first thing we did with my team is we established a working agreement or a service level agreement. The reason we did this is there was an interesting friction when I first started between the two teams, like between the design team and then my team, and then between the PM team and the design team. So I wanted us to all kind of come into alignment on how we were going to work together, when we were going to be brought into the process, how we were going to take in work, what work we were going to decide to actually do. So by creating a working agreement, it gave everyone a seat at the table on how we should collaborate together. And then everyone felt like they had at least some sort of opinion on how we were going to, if we were going to put our copy directly into a Figma file versus put it into a Google Doc. Like those little nuances were really important to work out because those were the friction points between the two teams. And that's when people started to stop being collaborative. So by just at least having some sort of solid footing and like a foundation for our team to all kind of rely back on, it helped us build better collaborative partnerships. And then it also gave us a way to hold each other accountable. Like we all agreed to this. So if someone's not holding up their end of the bargain, we kind of point back to it. And we typically bring out our working agreement in the kickoff. So if a project is just getting started, we'll try to reestablish at least the working norms between that current team. So those are a few different ways that we've kind of started to build the trust between the two teams.
Yeah, that's such a good idea. I guess a working agreement is probably very similar to a team contract that I've sort of seen used before,
For sure.
Where the team defines, their ways of working and what they need from each other and what the kind of expectations are of the different roles. Have you had success with those as well, Chetana?
I was just thinking about the nuance with the language here. I'm sure where Jordan is right now, the word agreement just got accepted. In my case, I've had to kind of go deep in my vocabulary and call it decision-making framework. And culturally, what worked was a rapid. Some companies use a RACI. So with the rapid, we had to, even on a content design project, we had to agree who's the recommender, who's the decision maker, who's the informer. So along with the rapid, we also created a content design playbook. And this playbook became a living document. It also allowed us to do quarterly roadshows where we started using case studies to demonstrate the value of content design, especially when it was used for top of the funnel. So how did XYZ experiment succeed or fail because of the impact content design had on it versus any other specific discipline? So with the playbook and a decision making framework, we were able to work through many of the challenging situations. And much like Jordan, we did learn to start bringing that at the beginning of a project as part of the kickoff.
Great, it's a great idea. I think we should spend much more time at the start of projects thinking about how things are going to go rather than just jumping straight in, because then you get problems halfway through and it's just obstructive to actually delivering the work. And I guess we've all kind of worked in those teams where, well, I've definitely worked in those teams where, maybe a product designer isn't used to co-designing, for example, and, is a bit guarded with the design process. They want to be the person that, holds the pen or runs workshops, and they kind of can be quite reluctant to kind of open that up to, maybe a content designer can initiate and facilitate a session, or maybe they can take part in sketching, they should be. But how do you, I guess particularly when product designers might be quite closed to that kind of level of co-design because maybe they're not used to it. How have you found the best ways to kind of foster that? Chelsea, I'll start with you on that one, I think.
Sure. So I used to go about it a way that I wouldn't recommend now, which is the whole learning from my mistakes, the whole kind of Venn diagram approach where I'd be like, content design's doing this and product design's doing that, and IA is right in the middle, and it's okay to share. And that just never seemed to land with folks. So what seems to have worked at Zendesk is modeling and being really clear with expectations from leadership. So I get the product design directors and the PMs on board with the expectation that co-designing is the way that we build products at Zendesk. And so that they relay that message to their designers. And when we go to critiques, we are often saying, okay, and have you already worked with your content designer on this? Like, has this gone through content review? And just keep hitting that message that collaboration and partnership is the way that we build. That has been the most effective, instead of just like trying to talk them into it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely. Has anyone tried, also, I think one of the things I've tried before, I don't know if anyone else has tried this, is actually instead of talking about we're content designers or we're UX writers and this is how we work, it's actually this is how we can add value to your design work. So almost like the what's in it for them. Has that worked for anybody before? Chetana, you're nodding on that one.
I think the two things that are a unifying factor is understanding the customer need, and this is where, similar to content designers, we know product researchers have also had to fight the good fight and find a seat at the table or find their voice. So for content designers or product designers or even product managers, really getting behind the customer-centric approach, along with, okay, what is the business metric we want to move, and what is the contribution each of us needs to make to move that singular metric. That unifying conversation has always been helpful. To the point about co-designing, again, vocabulary difference, paired designing is what I have been trying for a long time. I learned it from myself at Pivotal Labs. And while two designers pairing or two engineers pairing seemed very obvious, to pair a content designer with a product designer or a content designer with a PM in the initial stages has been so empowering. Content led or content first, or don't give me the wireframe then with lorem ipsum and then ask me to put the words on it. We've now gotten to a point where we know that is similar to asking a visual designer to prettify wireframes. So with paired designing also, we added nomenclature in the playbook, and we started using the design brief, which I mentioned earlier, as the kickoff point for the content designer and product designer to be on a project from end to end, as opposed to did this go through content design? Did it get that blessing, so to speak?
Yeah, that is so critical that they're both kind of brought in at the right, but together, but at the right point, rather than I just can't count on my fingers like more. I haven't got enough fingers and toes to count the number of times it's like almost been a bit of a conveyor belt process. Like, oh, we're going to bring in the researchers, and then we're going to bring in the product designers, and then we're going to bring in the content design, and then we'll bring in the engineering team. It's like, no. That isn't how a multidiscipline team works. It's not a conveyor belt. I also Jordan, I'd be keen to know this about how you work actually at Twitter, but it's not even just like isolated within teams. I think sometimes organizations can work like that. Like, oh, we're going to do this thing in design, and then we're going to bring in marketing, and then we're going to bring in product marketing. And like, I guess, again, like, how do we get that kind of cross-functional collaboration right from the start so that we're not doing this conveyor belt thing where, legal come in at the end and say, no, we absolutely can't do that. Like, how do we make sure that those teams are all kind of operating together as one from the start of an initiative?
Yeah, I'm fortunate. I don't actually experience this too much at Twitter. I think it goes back to Chelsea's original point of having pretty solid PMs who do understand that if we want this project to be successful, that we need all of the right people in the right rooms. The only point I was actually going to add to the last question is one strategy that we've tried and has been pretty successful is us kind of allowing all of the copy options that have been suggested, even if we didn't write them ourselves, into an experiment. I mean, this is the long way to do this, but typically the copy options that the content design team didn't write they're not as successful as the other options. And so we kind of get to show like, listen, we know what we're doing. We write from a system the same way that you design from a system. So like, trust our judgment because we're trying to build familiarity with trust and consistency. And so typically once we run that first experiment and they see how bad the copy options do against each other, it's like, oh, let's just get out of their way and let them do their jobs, right? So we build almost that trust between the two teams because I don't think that people understand the complexity sometimes of like why we're writing in a particular way, why we're using a certain call to action, etc. So by showing them versus just putting like a stake in the sand and being really firm, I've found that that doesn't necessarily work with people that have really strong opinions. So it's not the easiest or shortest route. So if you're doing this on like a very rushed or short timeline, probably not the route I would take. But, short term win, short term loss, long term win is the strategy that we've been kind of playing at Twitter. Is the long game for us, for sure.
Yeah, that's a really good strategy. It's almost like showing people that the rigor and the process behind how we create content is actually pretty hard, and it's not just let's just come up with some coffee.
And everyone's a writer, right? Everybody
Yeah.
can type into a Google Doc and
Yes.
think that, oh, this is probably a good option. But it's like, no, there is a system here that we're using. And like, we've thought about this, we've tested this, so it's just, it's not as simple as it seems. So.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have to plus one the show don't tell technique because it absolutely works. It also works with getting a head count, and you can just advocate for head count until you're blue in the face. But if you don't show it, it's not going to work. So, we've been really successful in letting teams that don't have content design partners, take their work to a design leader review, and the executives and senior leaders across design and product will literally be like, what's up with this content? Like, this flow doesn't make any sense. Like, and then I shoot them a note and say, yes, this team is not supported by content design. Like, we'd love to get headcount for this team. And so just the evidence is right there. You don't have to say anything, it speaks for itself.
Very effective. Yeah, definitely. Okay, well, we've only got about 10 minutes or so left, and I want to make sure I get to questions from our audience. So I'm going to jump in with some questions, if you don't mind. Our first question is from Vinesh, and he points out that sometimes people's kind of hidden agendas or motivations can affect collaboration. And he was wondering, how do you identify those motivations so that they don't impact the collaboration process? Any sort of tips or techniques for those? Who wants to take that one? I've often found that, I don't know if anyone else has tried this, but I've often found like a pre-mortem exercise quite useful for this, where you kind of workshop, like you say, project ourselves forward 6 months, everything's gone wrong on this project, what's gone wrong and why, because it uncovers people's kind of concerns and fears, and then helps you kind of come up with like ways of mitigating them. But yeah, I'm keen to hear about any other techniques anyone's tried for this.
I think the thing that if I were to see some sort of behavior like this is to try and root it back to what customer problem are we solving, especially since my team is working on a very specific product. So if we can't root it back to an actual customer problem or solution to something that we're seeing is happening within the app, then I actually start to question the prioritization of the project in itself, right? So to me, that would easily tell me if someone's working on it simply for personal motivations because they think it's going to be, big and splashy, or if we're working on it for the right reasons.
Yeah, anyone?
Yeah, I was thinking of the question and realizing it maps very much to the first question you asked us about how do we assess the health of a team, and this team clearly feels unhealthy to me. On the one hand, I feel every team requires every individual to have a personal drive. So I'm a bit conflicted, but I can see how that personal individual drive needs to serve the collective. And therefore, to Jordan's point, the collective is best identified by the North Star or the customer centricity. But the most important thing the manager on the team can do for the functional discipline is mapping their personal drive to the individual's career growth and assessing if the career growth is accountable, if certain behaviors are showing up as patterns, if they are being under check and balance or not. So I think it's a mix of individual coaching while also aligning with the collective team's agenda or sort of goals.
I always just like to say, or the question I usually ask is like, okay, who are we helping with that suggestion? And if the answer, like to Jordan's point, is not the customer, then we need to revisit that suggestion and why we would do it.
Okay, I've got another question here from Mike. He would like to know, what tactics do you employ to help those in siloed teams who care more about ownership than partnership to see that partnering is actually much more effective? Who'd like to start with this one?
The incentivizing collaboration is really important, and that goes back to those leadership expectations. Who's getting called out in the quarterly all hands? Is it the individuals? Is it like the Michael Jordan effect, or is it like the whole team? Are we talking about the whole Chicago Bulls? I hope my sports metaphor is working. So yeah, are leaders showing that they also care about collaboration? Because that goes a long way, and then how is it being rewarded? To your point about career growth earlier, is that part of your OKR? Is that part of how you actually get promoted, that you work well with others, that you build partnerships, that you build alignment? Or is it all about, you're the superstar that's shipping stuff on your own every quarter? So I think that expectations, incentivization, and communicating both of those is really important at the cultural level for the company.
Definitely. Anyone want to add to that one? Okay, I'll move on to a question.
Covered quite a bit. I always, for me, the question is always, where does this silo start from? And how long is going to continue staying that way? And why is it going to stay that way? How is it serving? I also understand that the content design discipline in and of itself cannot take on such lofty questions, but the customer does suffer when we continue to operate in a silo, especially if you're not working off a unified content design principles framework or not working closely with brand and marketing, because we do need to be able to speak from that same ethos or values of the organization. So silos is really often created by the leadership, like to Chelsea's point, the stakeholders at the very top, and it really should be questioned at that level. What is it informing? In fact, there's more personal motivation in the siloed org than even the previous question. So yeah, it does require a deeper investigation most of the time.
Okay, I've got a question from Mary. This is actually something I've also experienced. So she says, assigning roles and responsibilities and accountability on a project can be helpful, but it can also lead to very difficult conversations. So has anyone got any suggestions on how to handle those conversations so that people feel like they're heard and appreciated, but you don't stall and you can still keep movement on the project?
I think this goes back to having the working agreement or a DASIN or a RACI, but you essentially need to form some sort of foundational documentation on who is the driver of the project, who is the final approver. And you can only have, honestly, one of both of those positions. And then the rest are people who are consulted on the work or informed on the work. And I think that it's okay if the person that has the ultimate responsibility is the person that is approving that project. I think that's a really hard pill to swallow sometimes, but sometimes from a content design perspective, my team is not going to be the final say on a product, but at least from a content perspective, we are the final say. So establishing where you're able to actually approve the work is going to be really key. And like, if everyone leaves their ego at the door to as best as they can, then I think that's the easiest way to at least set up those working agreements so everyone's kind of moving in the same direction. It doesn't feel great sometimes. It feels like you might be the only person that's willing to meet someone halfway. But I think if other people see you doing that, then they're much more likely to do that as well.
One of the things, I was going to say, one of the things that we've tried for this very situation is really refining the career ladder for each of the disciplines. So it can be very fuzzy. 2 years ago, the product managers had titles like junior or senior or entry or even a director level role for a PM. But what is it that you do? What is it that you're held accountable for vis-a-vis a product designer? Because these days it can be such a fine line, and then a content designer. So really investing in clear career ladders that are unified across the organization, and then of course evangelizing and educating, and holding that as an accountability bar in performance reviews, in one-on-ones, and even in career coaching, has helped handle those tough conversations, because then it's not at the project level, it's at the individual's growth level conversation. And I think Chelsea mentioned at some point about OKRs and having that unified point of view. I think that's another way to have a shared accountability.
Chelsea, anything to add to that?
No, but I just wanted to explain what OKRs were. They're just a goal setting paradigm, and I should have explained that when I used the acronym. Sorry. Dropping acronyms here.
Objectives and key results.
Objective key results. Yeah, objective key results.
Yeah, so making sure that your team has sort of shared objectives and you're all working to the same things. Just, I guess, the last question, because we're almost at time, but just keen to hear from all of you about remote working and the effect you think that's sort of had on collaboration, because I guess in a way it's a bit of a leveler and it can take away some of those hierarchies that can, hold people back or make them feel a bit more, like scared of chipping in at meetings or, taking part in the ideation session. So on the one hand, it's a leveler, but I guess on the other hand, it makes people able to sit back, or, the people that are less likely to kind of engage in that to sort of almost hide into the background a little bit. So I'm just keen to hear your views on whether you think in your organisations remote working has helped collaboration or hindered it, or what effect that's had really. Anyone want to start with that one?
I think in some ways, I think remote work has actually aided in collaboration, especially my team's very global. We're from Singapore all the way to Poland, Dublin, here, New York, we're everywhere. And when we were in office in San Francisco, that office just held so much weight. We were distributing information to the distributed offices. And now that we all work on Slack, basically, the async communication and collaboration, our skills have grown. We're always having Miro boards that people know to check 8 hours after it's been launched, because someone will have added something. So in that way, I think it's helped. And the way that I think it's hurt is just like the ability to read a room. That's so important for collaboration and like to gauge the vibe of the conversation. There's just so many misunderstandings. Is this person upset with me, or are they just being blunt? Are they just slacking on their way to the bank? What is the subtext of conversations? That's all been lost without like physical body language to read. So I think that's hindered us.
Jordan, how's it helped your team or hindered your team?
Very similar. I couldn't agree more. I think for me personally, I miss getting into a room and throwing things on a whiteboard and just vibing with my team and kind of being able to see if someone's having an off day, because it's really hard to do through like virtual meetings. But it's also taught us how to be more collaborative through Miros, through Google Docs and things like that. So it has leveled the playing field for folks that may feel a lot more introverted in person. It doesn't force them to have, in person. It doesn't force them to have to be so extroverted in a way that they may have been uncomfortable with. So it's a little bit of both.
Yeah. And Chetana, anything to add?
I think Chelsea and Jordan have covered a lot of the living day-to-day nuances. One of the things that I've noticed on my team that we've had to work really hard is engagement. Are you in the Zoom call that you're in, Or are you in multiple different tabs and holding multiple different conversations, one on Slack, one on email, one here? And to be honest, for content designers, we did introduce design crits, which has been evolutionary, if not revolutionary, to give that methodical approach to critiquing content design, and that required complete presence and engagement. So, just in addition to everything Chelsea and Jordan have added, how does one stay authentic and present when you're literally in this leveled playing field of all of us as a rectangular box, which is wonderful. Doesn't matter how tall you are or what color you are, but it does require this honest sincerity to show up for your designer's work or for your executive leader's presentation. So remote work has given us a bit of slack there, but has also made us crazily productive because no one gets away from their computers anymore.
No, it's terrible, isn't it? It's terrible. We're just always in front of a screen. Well, I've got to wrap up because we're out of time, even though I could actually chat to you all for a lot longer. But thank you so much to all of you for joining us. That was really fun, really inspiring. If you have any questions we didn't get to, please drop them in the chat, and we can maybe try and get them answered from our panelists later on.